hazardous, detrimental influence, infiltration. These were the words used to describe the perceived influence of immigrants and Black homeowners on residential communities. Discriminatory housing practices in the 1930s led mortgage lenders to designate certain communities more desirable than others. Not coincidentally, the separation was often made along the lines of race. The term redlining refers to lenders who used red ink to outline the parts of a city that were considered to have a high risk of defaulting on loans. And these riskier neighborhoods were home to large Black and minority populations. Welcome to 90 Minutes on Croft News Network. I'm your host, Anjana Sriram, joined tonight by Professors Ruchira Hariharan and Katerina Mueller. First, let's turn to Professor Mueller for a deeper dive into the history and importance of redlining.
In 1933, just as the US was emerging from the Great Depression, a massive housing shortage led to government policies that focused on creating suburban communities for white families. These policies were directed by the Federal Housing Administration, developed by President Franklin Roosevelt, to encourage American home ownership. The Federal Housing Administration developed a policy that solely allowed them to loan mortgages to white people, under the premise that the presence of Black people in suburban neighborhoods would lower the market value of the homes, when in fact the opposite is true.
If property values were low, lenders thought that Black homeowners would not be able to repay the loans they took out. It was an extremely prejudiced policy that was not supported by any empirical evidence, but based entirely on racist attitudes. So what are the ramifications of redlining today? Let's turn to Professor Hariharan to understand the impacts of this 1930s policy.
Black communities are impacted the most by redlining, being pushed into urban neighborhoods effectively segregated from white residential areas. This segregation has created a vicious cycle that has placed Black communities in poverty for over a century. Given that Black Americans were not given mortgages for their homes, their communities were significantly poorer than those of their white counterparts. As a result, the people of Black communities have lower credit scores than those of white communities and are less likely to receive subsequent loans on their homes from the FHA. Each time the FHA distributes loans for mortgages, they classify districts into levels of first, second, third, and fourth grade, with each subsequent grade having lower credit scores and financial security. Due to policies of redlining, Black and POC communities consistently fall into the fourth grade status marked in red, hence the name redlining, and are very unlikely to receive a loan. This further decreases their overall credit score, making it even more difficult for them to receive a loan in the future, perpetuating a cycle of poverty in said communities. Accordingly, redlining is one of the main reasons for the persisting wealth disparity between Black and white families, as seen on the graph displayed.
Professor Mueller, what is the public's awareness of redlining?
The majority of people do not know about redlining, even though it's been a part of Americans' policies for over 50 years. Most politicians, however, are aware of redlining. Sadly, some try to pass legislation to make it even more damaging to Black communities. This took place in 2020 when Trump attempted to end a fair housing rule that addressed the lasting impacts of redlining, which the House of Representatives didn't pass. But this demonstrates how some don't take this issue seriously.
Thank you. Professor Hariharan, what are some proposed solutions that do not work well?
A solution that some propose is offering down payments to people in neighborhoods that were established as hazardous in the homeowners loan corporation. The problem with this solution is that today, these neighborhoods are mostly home to Hispanic and white populations. Although this solution would help solve some of the redlining issues in Hispanic and white communities, it wouldn't aid Black communities who have suffered the most from redlining for decades.
Thank you, Professor. So let's look at some viable solutions to combat redlining in America today. First and foremost, we need to invest in neighborhoods that have been wronged by redlining. For example, we can increase funding for schools that are in redline districts because historically, these schools have lacked many resources.
We also need federal funding to promote financial literacy and education in Black communities, which would enable Black homeowners to avoid predatory loans. Additionally, federal policy changes are needed to recalculate credit scores to include payments for rent, utilities, etc. The current method of credit calculations leaves out these types of recurring payments, which portrays an inaccurate and incomplete picture of people when applying for loans. For Black communities especially, low credit scores are used to deny access to loans, so finding a more comprehensive way to calculate credit scores can help fix that issue. Finally, state governments must create a committee to oversee private mortgage lenders. The state should be able to shut down predatory lenders who offer higher interest rates for minority communities than white communities.
Thank you. It's important to understand that even though it is illegal, redlining and its consequences for Black communities are still very present today. Housing inequity is arguably one of the most damaging forms of inequity since it translates to poor educational attainment and fewer economic opportunities. Solutions to redlining exist. Now it's up to us to act. This has been your host, Anjana Sriram, with Professors Hurry Hearn and Katarina Mueller. Thank you both for joining us tonight. We'll see you next Tuesday, only on 90 Minutes.